Hi, hello. We are at the end of another October, and as usual, the scariest thing about this time of year is in fact my TBR. So I thought I would jump on the 10 before the end challenge or prompt today with the usual and plentiful caveats that I ideally would like to read a lot more than 10 before the end. And so this is kind of just my starting place. There are a lot of books, obviously, that I want to read, and you'd think I'd be happy because this week I kind of hit where I was last year. Now, last year was a kind of downturn reading year for me. All of this is within the context of my own personal reading life and where I know I generally lay. I read like 105 titles last year. Now that spans novels, short stories, nonfiction, plays, lots of things, obviously. And this year I'm at like 104 as of today. If I finish my audiobook after this yet today while making some chili, I will be at 105. So right on track for all of last year, which is great. But at the same time, even amidst a really stellar reading year, all I can think about are all of the books that I haven't gotten to yet because it feels like there are so many this year that I still haven't read. So I picked out 10 physical books amidst those. Of course, I generally also have an ebook and an audiobook going at the same time. So hopefully we will still read a lot. Also, I have some very exciting for me PTO coming up. So I am taking a week of PTO where I am just going to hang out and read a little staycation, which I have very much been looking forward to. And that is also going to segue into my romance book club's first reading weekend reading retreat, which I am very excited about. And I hope to take us along for some of those festivities, but I'm hopeful that that time will help me get through some of this as well. But before we dive all the way into the stack itself, hi, my name is Melody, and we talk about books and book adjacent things on this channel, whether it be monthly anticipated releases videos, monthly wrap-up videos, weekly, ideally, book discussions, book reviews, discussions of book to screen or book to stage adaptations, or just conversations about the book community and literary world in general. If any of that sounds of interest to you, like and subscribe and hang out a little longer. And if you are already subscribed, thank you so much for being here, and you can throw a like in if you feel like it. I wouldn't stop you. But with that, let's go ahead and dive into these books. I am going to try and read these blurbs for you as well, which could be dicey because when I am reading out loud on the spot, sometimes it goes really well if I'm in the groove, and sometimes I get in my own head a little too much. But the first book I would like to read of these 10 that I have selected is Good and Evil and Other Stories by Samantha Schweblin. This is her newest short story collection, and as it says on the jacket, in Samantha Schweblin's literary universe, the monsters of everyday life lurk in plain sight. My favorite, right? A mother surfaces from the depths of the lake behind her house, returned to her family, yet unable to ignore the pull of the lake's oblivion. A home invasion turns into an overnight stay that is as awkward as it is terrifying. A father receives nightly phone calls that are silent but speak volumes about his son's enigmatic disappearance. A dying woman reaches out to a friend she hasn't spoken to in 20 years, not since the accident that divided their lives into a before and an after. In each of these haunting tales, Schweblin examines a life at a point of no return. Some characters will be transformed by their encounters, others will be stunned to stillness. In this hypnotic world, as recognizable as it is strange, Schweblin pauses time at the brink of an impending tragedy to let us inhabit the suspense of a moment of transformation. In the delicate telling of miraculous and shocking events, Samantha Schweblin demonstrates once again why she is on the absolute forefront of a new generation of storytellers. What a blurb, right? Now, Schweblin is the best for me, or my favorite Schweblin is in her short fiction. So my favorite collection is A Mouthful of Birds, and I'm very hopeful that this is going to be kind of similar in a lot of its themes. I think was it last year's or the year before, Seven Empty Houses was like kind of disquieting, but it didn't explore the odd in quite the same way. Also, if for some reason you've never encountered Schweblin's work, I would put her most closely with Mariana Enriquez, put a pin in that, and I love them in conversation with each other, and they both play within similar, like really haunted, disquieting short stories that have, like the blurb says, this bit of the familiar with a little bit of the odd, a little bit of the speculative, and the dangerous. And that is where I am the most intrigued in the realm of short stories. I like a little bit of odd in my short stories, and so anytime Schweblin has a collection, I'm excited. Obviously, I am behind on this one though, so I need to catch up. I had to take it back to the library halfway through, but I also started the short story collection Odd Body, which is also it's more kind of as it sounds on the tin, a little bit more body horror focused. Odd Body was apt in that case, which I always like when that like works out, by Rose Keating, but I was taking and savoring the stories, and it was due back at the library before I'd finished. I got about halfway through, so I need to get my hands back on that in relation to like odd short stories. So next, to kind of ping pong back and forth, I guess, I would like to read Diana Quincy, or I need to read before the end of the year, Diana Quincy's new book, The Earl That Got Away. And this is her second in the Sirens and Silk series, following The Duke Gets Desperate, which you may remember from winning my March Mass Market Madness paperback reading vlog from last year, and is a persuasion retelling. And so it says, American Nala Darwish always regretted calling off her engagement to the man she loved because he wasn't successful enough for her family. 8 years later, she travels to England for her sister's wedding and gets the shock of her life when she runs into Basil again. Overjoyed, she wonders if fate has given her a second chance at love. But Basil Trevelyan is not the same carefree young man Nyla rejected those years ago. Having unexpectedly inherited a noble title, ding, 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 he is now the Earl of Harksworth, one of England's most sought-after bachelors. Still bitter after Nyla's heart-wrenching rejection all those years ago, Hawk is cold and distant, suspecting Nyla is after his money and position. When the two lost lovers are repeatedly thrown together, they discover that the chemistry between them burns brighter than ever, and that some feelings are too strong to deny. Will they allow pride and resentment to keep them from seizing their last chance at happiness? I loved the tension that we got in the first of this series, and so this feels like it's going to have that combined with angst, which I feel like I haven't had for a hot second. And selfishly, I want all of you to read this book because I'm a little bitter. I went to an online book launch book event that was a combination of Diana Quincy in conversation with Megan Frampton and Cheris Michaels, I believe. And at that event, as I'm sure I will also talk about as we do a kind of retrospective on the state of historical romance this year after last year's conversation, Diana Quincy revealed this is her last historical romance under contract with Avon, or under contract period. I have a lot of feelings about like what the heck is going on at Avon, which again, I'm not going to get into here. I'm, as a reader, very frustrated though. I feel a lot of feelings about it. But selfishly, I really, really want this book to do well and her backlist to continue to do well because I love them. I find a lot of comfort in them. I wouldn't have binged one on the plane back from Tokyo if not. And I just want there to be demand for these books, especially as this series and her last series have had Palestinian characters on page in historical romance in a way that really elevates the storytelling. I loved her last series as well. So definitely check those out if you haven't, and I will be making sure I get to that before the year is over. And then I would like to read, this is another one where why aren't we all reading this? I mean, I say as I still need to read this. Iron Tongue of Midnight by Brittany N. Williams, which is the third in the Forge and Fracture saga, which is a historical YA fantasy that takes place in Elizabethan England and has Shakespeare as a character. As it says in the blurb, it all ends with the Fae Queen. Unrestrained by the fractured pact and its fragile peace, Titania and her forces grow stronger each day. The Fae openly terrorize London while King James hides in the countryside, protected by the children of the Orisha. 17-year-old Joan Sands must banish the Fae, just as her ancestor did nearly 2,000 years ago, but first she'll have to unravel the mystery behind the original pact. Armed with a magical sword and the power to manipulate and create metal, Joan gathers allies and enemies in unlikely places as the world she knew slips further away. But the children of the Orisha struggle to wield their magic for war, and Joan clashes with the elders who refuse to trust the fate of the world to a child, all while her two loves, Nick and Rose, grow closer to each other, a prospect more momentous and alluring than Joan could ever have imagined. When a spirit bent on annihilating all who worship the Orisha is unleashed, Joan discovers the unsettling truth behind the original pact. Faced with the lies of the past, the frightening power of the Fae, and a mortal king whose dangerous whims hold her community hostage, Joan must decide, is the old world worth saving, or is it time to forge something frighteningly new? Which, epic in scale and scope there in the blurb. However, what I don't feel is captured well enough in that blurb, which was great, is just how like fun these books are, and there is a humor to them, especially within the characterization of Shakespeare and his company, and having that as a whole community within the course of the books. And I love seeing how Shakespeare's plays are incorporated in the storytelling as well. I mean, beyond just the use of Titania, and Oberon has made an appearance once or twice, but I really enjoy that, and so I really need to finish that up, especially as I peeked on Goodreads last night, and this still has under 1,000 ratings period, which I feel is a real shame because this is exactly the kind of YA series I would have eaten up as a young adult, with its combination of the fantasy and the Elizabethan element and Shakespeare. I think it has just everything going for it and is absolutely something that should be on your radar if it isn't already. And with that, moving on, the next book I want to read, and what I am tentatively thinking of starting my staycation with, is The Raven Scholar by Antonia Hodgson. Now, I bought this back on Indie Bookstore Day, and I have even since purchased a discounted Kobo copy because this is a chunker. Like, I knew it was going to be a chunker. I obviously held it before I purchased it, but there are or were some regrets, right? Like, this is going to be a beast of a book to hold to read. So we'll see how I actually read it, like what the breakdown of how much I read in physical versus how much I read in digital is. I will say though, and I don't know how this is going to do with the focus, but the font looks accessible here, which my eyes are bad. I don't want to play with really small font in a really big book anymore. But The Raven Scholar is a masterfully woven tale of imperial intrigue from an electrifying new voice in epic fantasy. Let us fly now to the Empire of Oran, where after 24 years of peace, the reign of Burson the Brusque has come to an end. In the dizzying heat of midsummer, 7 exceptional warriors, thinkers, and strategists compete to replace him. When one of them is murdered, it falls to Nima Kra, the Emperor's brilliant, idiosyncratic high scholar, to find the killer and fight for the throne. Nima believes she is alone, but we are here to help. All she has to do is let us in. If she succeeds, we will win an empire. If she fails, death awaits her, but we won't let that happen. Which already the voice of that is interesting. I haven't read or watched a whole lot of in-depth reviews on this yet because I know I want to read it. However, I have watched people I trust talk about it a little bit more generally, and I've so far heard only good things about this, and I frankly anticipate it being one of the Goodreads fantasy nominees for the year, so I definitely want to make sure I get it read. It also has a lot of excellent blurbs on the back, so definitely want to check this out. Additionally, did I have any more thoughts related to this? No, I don't think I do. So definitely want to see what that is about. I will say, with the idea of making that the start of my reading retreat, my only hesitation is in years past, sprinkled throughout my reading history, I have hunkered down for like an extended reading break and started with a denser fantasy that I've been looking forward to. And then that has subsequently thrown me into a little bit of a slump because it was not exactly what I expected. I have 2 very notable examples in my reading history, but I feel like the general consensus would not agree with me on those two, and I'm just gonna keep it to myself, but I'm really hopeful I will fall into the more general excitement about that one. Next, I want to read A Gentleman's Gentleman by T.J. Alexander, which is a new historical romance, and it says, "The notoriously eccentric Lord Christopher Eden is a man of unusual make and even more unusual habits, but Christopher's pleasant, if occasionally lonely life is upended when he receives word that he must find a wife if he intends to keep his family's fortune and the Eden estate. Romance reasons. Christopher's situation is dire. As women do not appeal to him, his chances of making a wife happy are slim. Furthermore, if his quest to marry has any hope of succeeding, he must acquire some more suitable staff. Enter James Harding, Christopher's new, distractingly handsome, if rigidly traditional valet. The two strike up a fragile friendship amid the throes of the London season, a friendship that threatens to shatter under the looming shadow of Christopher's impending nuptials, and the secret both men are keeping. With its heady combination of dry wit, slow-burn sexual tension, and nuanced portrait of trans identity, A Gentleman's Gentleman stands to transform the historical romance genre as we know it. Very excited about this. It also has a blurb from K.T. Hoffman on it, and The Prospects was one of my favorite books last year, and I think maybe one of the only sports romances I've read recently. I need to get on the Cat Sebastian. I'm behind on that, which reminds me, this book with its blurb reminds me of one of my favorite Cat Sebastian titles from very early in her career. Actually, let me pull it up, which is, and yes, I had to look it up, I'm sorry, The Lawrence Brown Affair, which came out in 2017, which I do just want to take a moment for, because while 2017 feels very long ago in some ways, it's obviously not. And Cat Sebastian is the first author from Avon I remember in historical romance that was being published openly with queer romances. And so when we think about where the genre has come, or how far the genre has come in such a short time, like, we haven't really had on-page representation of queer love stories in historical romance in the mainstream as long. And so it is easy to take for granted sometimes all that we have, while we still don't have clearly enough. But even thinking about Cat Sebastian, and I think she started as digital only and then moved in to them actually printing the mass markets as well. So lots to be said, but I'm very excited to have another entry into the genre, and am very intrigued by this setup and have heard other historical romance readers really enjoy this title. And I know we are getting another historical romance from Alexander next year, so that is very exciting. And I am only ashamed that I am this far behind, especially for what I believe is a historical romance debut. Now I feel like I need to check myself on that as well. But yes, I think TJ Alexander is most known for contemporary romance outside of this, so definitely need to get that read. And then swinging back to the pin we put in Mariana Enriquez, because for me as a reader, the best kind of reading year is when we get both a Mariana Enriquez and a Samantha Schweblin, and we are in luck because it is exactly that kind of year. Am I behind on it? Absolutely. I went and picked up my copy of Somebody is Walking on Your Grave by Mariana Enriquez weeks ago when it came out. I battled through Applefest in Lincoln Square to pick up a copy at the bookseller, and I still need to get to it, but I'm very excited and kind of intrigued because the format of this is not exactly what I was expecting. So Mariana Enriquez, called a sorceress of horror by the New York Times, has been fascinated by the haunting beauty of cemeteries since she was a teenager. She had visited them frequently, a goth flaneur, taking notes on her aesthetic obsession as she walks among the headstones, where dying seems much more interesting than being alive. But when the body of a friend's mother, who was disappeared during Argentina's military dictatorship, was found in a common grave, Enriquez began to examine more deeply the complex meanings of cemeteries and where our bodies come to rest. In this rich book of essays, Enriquez travels through North and South America, Europe and Australia, visiting Paris's catacombs, Prague's old Jewish cemetery, New Orleans' above-ground mausoleums, Buenos Aires' opulent Recoleta, and more. Enriquez investigates each cemetery's history and architecture, its saints and ghosts, its caretakers and visitors, and of course, its dead, weaving personal stories with reportage, interviews, myths, hauntology, and more. Somebody is Walking on Your Grave is memoir channeled through Enriquez's passion for cemeteries, revealing as much about her own life and unique sensibilities as the graveyards and tombstones she tours. Fascinating, spooky, and unlike anything else, Enriquez's first work of nonfiction, translated by the award-winning Megan McDowell, also the translator of Schweblin, is as original and memorable as the stories and novels for which she became so beloved and admired. Now, I knew this was nonfiction, which I'm very excited about, especially for this word that I do not think I've heard before, hauntology. Love that. Would also put Colin Dickey's Ghostland in that category, which I recently also recommended for a friend. But okay, so I was expecting the essays, but I wasn't sure what form they were going to take. And it seems we are organizing it, which the blurb, the extended blurb, makes more obvious, but we are organizing it more by specific cemetery, which makes sense again in that context. So I'm very excited to dig into this. We do have a few pictures throughout here, but more just as an introductional image to each cemetery, it looks like. So I'm very interested in this as a bit of cultural anthropology and sociology and storytelling, and also just to see how Enriquez's voice translates to nonfiction while still within subject matter that is very familiar. Next, I need to get to the highly anticipated sequel to A Secret Society of Very Irregular Witches. Did I say that right? No, I didn't. It's The Secret Society of Irregular Witches. It did not need more words from me, by Sangu Mandana, and this is, of course, her follow-up novel, A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping. Sarah Swan used to be one of the most powerful witches in Britain. Then she resurrected her great-aunt Jasmine from the very recently dead, lost most of her magic, befriended a semi-villainous talking fox, and was exiled from her guild. Now she slightly reluctantly and just a bit grumpily helps Jasmine run an enchanted inn in Lancashire, where she deals with her quirky guest shenanigans. I love a shenanigans, tries to keep said talking fox in check, and longs for a future that seems lost to her. But then she finds out about an old spell that could hold the key to restoring her power. Intonation there was weird, but we persevere. Enter Luke Larson, a handsome and icy magical historian who arrives on a dark autumn evening and just might know how to unlock the spell's secrets. Luke has absolutely no interest in getting involved in the madcap going-ons of the inn and is definitely not about to let a certain bewitching innkeeper past his walls, so no one is more surprised than he is when he agrees to help Sarah with her spell. Worse, he might actually be thawing. Running an inn, reclaiming lost magic, and staying one step ahead of the watchful guild is a lot for anyone, but Sarah Swan is about to discover that she doesn't have to do it alone, and that the weird, wonderful family she's made might be the best magic of all. It sounds like it's going to have just as much heart and charm as The Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which is just one of my favorite, if you want to count it as like a cozy fantasy romance. But it was one of my favorites of that year, and I have been highly anticipating the follow-up. I think the romance in that was sweet and earnest, and when we talk about like building up of that longing, I think that that was so evident in that first book and part of the characterizations of that. But I also loved, and I feel like a lot of us were drawn to as readers, the found family element of that, which it feels like this is going to have a different iteration or flavor of that. So I've been kind of saving this for just like a warm hug of a book, because the first is just a warm hug of a book, and I think it's a good omen that there are little steaming teacups at the beginning of each chapter in terms of like what exactly we're getting into here. But I'm very, very excited to dive into this one. I ideally wanted to get to it in October, as I did with many of these books, and while I've had a really stellar reading month, I haven't had time for everything, unfortunately. So we just have to keep going. So my final 3 books are probably not going to be much of a surprise, but also maybe, I don't know. The first I definitely want to get to is Wild Reverence by Rebecca Ross. Also, if you are a fan of a step back, look at that under the jacket. So also, if you're a fantasy reader and are trying, or a romantasy reader and are trying to shame a step back, I don't think I've ever heard anyone doing that, but you know, the idea of the historical romance step back has gone through phases. There are some of us that love them, I'm a love, and there are some that find it outdated and corny. I love them. So you can see the inspiration of the step back here for sure. But this is Rebecca Ross's newest fantasy that is supposed to be a kind of standalone prequel to the fantasy and mythology we get in the Divine Rivals duology. So, born in the firelit domain of the Underrealm, Matilda is the youngest goddess of her clan, blessed with humble messenger magic she uses to carry words and letters through the realms. Where have we seen that before? But the gods will kill for power, and Matilda holds a secret she must hide from even her dearest allies. And there is a mortal who dreams of her, though they have never met in the waking world. 10 years ago, Vincent de Beckett wrote to Matilda on the darkest night of his life, begging the goddess he befriended in dreams to help him. His request went unanswered, and Vincent became a hardened, irreverent lord of the river who has long forgotten Matilda, until she comes tumbling into his bedroom window with a letter for him. Matilda and Vincent were fated to find each other beyond dreams, but to rewrite the blood-soaked ways of the gods, Matilda will have to face something she fears even more than losing her magic, finally allowing herself to be loved. I have heard readers, again, I haven't read reviews really in depth on this yet because I know I want to read it and form my own opinions. However, I feel like, one, I'm getting some Lanny Taylor kind of vibes to this. I'm thinking Strange the Dreamer. I'm thinking about the fact that I've read Strange the Dreamer multiple times and still have my pre-ordered copy of Muse of Nightmares on my shelf unread because I was so stressed out by Strange the Dreamer's ending and wanted to preserve the hope. And the fact in relation to that, that I feel like I've seen people talking about how this emotionally devastated them. And I don't really have context for in what way, which I feel like has made me hold off on it until like the late fall winter period where I am ready to be emotionally devastated. Maybe on my PTO I am in the right mind to be emotionally devastated. I about said I read Divine Rivals on PTO and that would be kind of full circle, but I didn't. I didn't read Divine Rivals on PTO. I'm pretty sure I was laid off at the time. But I need to get to that, and I'm excited. I still have to read, I don't have it on hand right now, but the sequel to A River Enchanted, A Fire Endless, I have that. I still need to read too. I have so much I need to read. There are so many good books. Anyway, I also need to read the newest historical romance from one of my personal go-to historical romance authors, Joanna Shupe, The Gilded Heiress, which is a retelling specifically of, or a reimagining specifically, or stemmed from and spun off from specifically the Anastasia cartoon movie. We had a little bit of a discussion about that at her book tour stop at the last chapter for this. I was so excited she was on book tour for this. I've been able to see both Sarah MacLean and Joanna Shupe this year. I'd seen Sarah MacLean before in conversation with Adriana Herrera at Printers Row Lit Fest, which I still am so grateful for that panel because like two of my favorite historical romance authors on one panel, it was a fabulous conversation, and to get to go with my whole romance book club. Most of my romance book club could not make it to the Joanna Shupe event, which was a real bummer because I love Joanna Shupe and I know a lot of them do too. But I was so glad that that event existed, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later in another video as well. But in conversation with that, because I haven't obviously read the book yet, and I didn't before going to the event, but just based on the blurb itself, I was like, is that a Lindbergh baby reference? And obviously Charles Lindbergh is something, but the Lindbergh baby, being what it was. But indeed, she did confirm that while, it was historically later than the Gilded Age, there are some echoes of Lindbergh baby meets Anastasia in this concept, which is, in 1878, a baby was stolen from the wealthiest family in America. Though no ransom was ever demanded, the Pendleton family never gave up hope, and the reward became the stuff of legend. After being raised in a children's asylum, Josie Smith ends up on the streets and quickly learns how to take care of herself. Her singing voice draws crowds on every corner, and she'll stop at nothing to become famous and travel the world, loved and adored by all. Maybe then she won't think about the family who gave her away as an infant. Leo Hardy isn't afraid to use his charm and wits to make a fast buck, especially with a mother and 5 siblings to support. When he stumbles upon a beautiful young woman singing in the street, Leo notices her striking resemblances to the infamous missing baby's mother, Mrs. William Pendleton. The Hardys lost everything thanks to the Pendletons, and once Leo sees Josie, he seizes the opportunity to settle the score. All he needs to do is pull off the biggest swindle of his career. As the two are catapulted into Knickerbocker high society, they grow closer to their goal as well as to each other. But secrets can stay hidden for only so long. Soon the truth unfolds, and both Josie and Leo must separate what's real from what's just gilding. Couple things with this one. Obviously, this is the first time we've seen Joanna Shupe in trade paperback. It will not be the last time, because mass markets are dead. Long live mass markets. Kind of devastating. We'll talk about that another day. However, what I'm really interested in, and one of the things that Shupe talked about in her conversation, is the use of first person, which you might not think much of. However, as a long-term historical romance reader, and as a long-term Shupe romance reader, she historically uses third person point of view. And I, as someone who doesn't think of themselves as very married to particular points of view, in the sense that when people say that romance should only be first person, honestly, that annoys me. And maybe that's because I tend to really enjoy third person, and I really enjoy third person dual point of view. And I've always taken for granted the dual point of view of it all. Again, when it's done well and when it's done correctly, it's the best, because you're seeing all sides of a love story. You are seeing that conflict from both sides. You're not getting repeat information because both points of view are forwarding the story from different angles. And it's just delicious and delightful, and it adds to a lot of that yearning that people are really clamoring for right now, because we're seeing what's kind of holding things back on both sides. What I found interesting in Joanna Shupe talking about the point of view in here was the fact that Leo is a con man, and we've seen con men as heroes in romance before, don't get me wrong, and honestly is also kind of a question mark in my mind, and what makes this character different or worse, in the sense that Shupe felt she needed to give that first person point of view to kind of help rationalize his decisions and some of the actions he was taking that was potentially, or were potentially, or are potentially, because I haven't read it yet, hurting the heroine. I don't know. I think that's going to be a very interesting conversation to circle back to. But I'm very excited by this, also because like Broadway history came up in the course of the conversation, so I'm assuming that that's touched on in the novel as well. But I'm going to be really interested to see how it fits in Shupe's larger body of work, especially because it feels like there are at least some deviations, or that it's a turning of a new page. The good news is Shupe is working on a new historical romance that she confirmed at the last chapter event, and that is going to be a Beauty and the Beast retelling dealing with divorce law in the Gilded Age, which I think is going to be stellar, especially because Shupe is someone unafraid to grapple with the parallels between the historical periods she's writing in and today, and remind us of how far we've come, and also how close we are to the past. And that is something I, as a reader, really respond to in her work. Down to, a complicated but accurate portrayal of Teddy Roosevelt in, I believe it was The Duke It's Even, when he was still a New York politician. So very excited for that one for sure. And finally, surprising surely no one, Catabasis, however we've decided to say it, by R.F. Kuang. I do believe she endorsed Catabasis, so that is what I will try to defer to, depending on what my mind keeps track of, though I think she said that ultimately it doesn't matter. But very excited by this. I pre-ordered this from a local bookstore, and so I, by happenstance, got the Sprayed Edges copy, which I'm only bringing up because it inadvertently led me to realize that I have a preference I did not know I had, or a strong feeling about something I did not know I had. So, like, this is beautiful. Great. Would I have paid $5 extra for this just cause? Probably not. And also, if I'd realized how it was printed, I definitely would, because I didn't realize I had such strong feelings. We're gonna throw off the focuses and the white balances here, because look how white this page is. I didn't realize that I had such strong feelings about the white contrast, or the contrast on my page in fiction, but turns out I do, which also makes sense because I can no longer read on my phone or my iPad like I used to be able to do in my early 20s, which is sad, but the truth, because I need that contrast. And part of it also is the light, because obviously you can play with the contrast on your phone and your iPad, I get that. But the contrast here is woo something. That's a very white page. So we will see how easy on the eyes this is, but I am very excited, and I will read the blurb if for some reason you have not yet read the blurb of this book. Alice Law has only ever had one goal: to become one of the brightest minds in the field of magic. She has sacrificed everything to make that a reality: her pride, her health, her love life, and most definitely her sanity. All to work with Professor Jacob Grimes at Cambridge, the greatest magician in the world. That is, until he dies in a magical accident that could possibly be her fault. Grimes is now in hell, and she's going in after him, because his recommendation is the key to her future, and he could hold her dreams in his now incorporeal hands. Unfortunately, her rival, Peter Murdoch, has come to the very same conclusion. With nothing but the records of Orpheus and Dante to guide them, bundles of chalk to draw the pentagrams necessary for their spells, and the burning desire to make all the academic trauma mean anything, they set off across hell to save a man they don't even like. But hell is not like the storybooks say. Magic isn't always the answer, and there's something in Alice and Peter's past that could forge them into the perfect allies or lead them to their doom. Now, by happenstance and intentional scrolling, I have seen very divisive reactions to this book, but I haven't seen specifics because, again, I kind of want to be able to form my own conclusions. But I'm very, very excited about the academic explorations in this book. I did not pursue a master's or a graduate, like a doctorate, because one of my mentors in college gave me some very sound advice in that she told me to wait before pursuing that, because I was a very good student, but that was what I knew, and I knew how to be a good student. And so taking a step back allowed me to kind of reframe and prioritize and see if whether academia was something I wanted to pursue in that way. And while I ultimately didn't, despite the fact that at one point I applied for a Fulbright, and that would have been the kind of exception to the rule of not going directly to grad school, though also I knew my chances were very, very slim. However, I'm still very much intrigued by kind of explorations and takedowns of academia, especially as I see parallels between the kind of critiques of academia on a much higher scale in many cases, and some of the critiques that I have mentioned that I have, especially for careers in the arts and the ways that it demands a lot of the people pursuing it. And so I'm interested to see how that plays out. I have read The Divine Comedy many years ago, I think right after I graduated college. I read one of the newer translations at the time because my idealistic butt waltzed into the Barnes & Noble, the DePaul bookstore Barnes & Noble downtown Chicago, and was like, what's the best translation of the Divine Comedy? And they looked at me like I was something, because I probably was. So I just picked one that was new and shiny and read that. I will say I don't remember a whole lot of the specifics, and I do remember really struggling through Purgatory and Paradise because those weren't as fun. So I am excited to see where some of that parallels, or we see some of that imagery in here as well. And yeah, we'll see just how I respond to this within Kwang's body of work. I really like that she is able to write in a lot of different voices and forms. So very excited to see what we get here, even amidst the kind of mixed reactions, because I'm interested and excited to see where I fall on the spectrum. Now, that being said, I still have a whole bunch of other books I would really like to read before the end of the year, including a whole bunch of historical romance that has still come out in 2025 that I need to swing back to or haven't gotten to yet, and just a plethora of other books. So those are my most immediate physical 10, but there are many, many more. And so if you have any of these on your TBR yet, I would love to hear about it. If any of these in particular you would like to hear or get Feature Friday conversations or reviews on, please let me know, and I will try to read them more specifically with that in mind as well. But that's just kind of where I'm sitting, and is giving you an idea of where my head is at while we move in to the rest of the reading year, or the end of the reading year. I also have a lot of things I would like to do here in terms of videos and ways to connect and things to talk about. So we will see how the rest of the year shakes out on all fronts, but thank you for hanging out. Like and subscribe if you feel like it. Let me know what is on your 10 before the end list, what you're still hoping to get to yet this year, regardless of how many you list out, but what's priority for you. But like and subscribe if you feel like it. Read something good. And yeah, bye.